soldier come from the war.
The role of religion in the First World War is one of the most discussed and underestimated, really, of the conflict. We live in a sort of increasingly secular, cynical age, I suppose, but it wasn't like that 100 years ago. And religion was central to people's lives, and everyone had gone through the Sunday school system. And even if they weren't churchgoers, there was like a diffused form of religion where it still permeated their existence. And I don't think it's any surprise that you can see it in the soldier songs. How many of the famous soldier songs that were actually took famous hymn tunes, things like, you know, what a friend we have in Jesus, become like, when this bloody war is over. Because it was a common currency, a common language. Everyone knew the tunes. Everyone had that same sort of basic upbringing. And, you know, the chaplains at the start of the war, you know, you counted the chaplains in the dozens. By the end of the war, you were counting them in the thousands. That's how big a role religion had, and how seriously the military took the role of religion as well, to have actually had, you know, enlisted that many chaplains as well. So how fitting to be here and do a show here this is the parish church of perhaps one of, you know, the most famous chaplains of the war, Theodore Bailey Hardy. Certainly the most decorated. He won a Victoria Cross, a military cross, a Distinguished Service Medal as well, all for helping people on the battlefield who were wounded, bringing them back to safety and risking his own life. And I don't think there's many more evocative stories of the war than the story of Theodore Bailey Hardy, and that catchphrase. He had this wonderful catchphrase where apparently he used to say all the time, "It's only me, it's only me." And so men from his battalion, if they were out in, you know, wounded in the darkness and laying there thinking, you know, what hope is there for me, then if they heard some scrabbling around in the dark at night, which is when the rescue parties would go out, and if they heard that phrase, "It's only me, it's only me," they knew that it's the chaplain, I'm going to be all right.
So he'd no need to go. He'd asked numerous times to go and be a chaplain, but they wouldn't accept him till one day they did.
His eyesight was very poor.
Yeah, he was short-sighted. Yeah, and I'm short-sighted, so I know what that's like. So then you kind of deal with what's in front of you. Your distant sight isn't there, so then you just concentrate on what's in front, and he would rely a lot on guidance. That would be guidance from above, and he went over the top numerous times. He went over the top all the time, and he was guided to do what he did. He must have had some inkling that he may not come back, and he gave furniture to people and went and visited every household and see that they were all okay. And then he biked to Arcombe station, which is quite a good mileage away, and so caught the train. The War Memorial Stone outside is made of limestone, which is from the crags at the back, which are SSI, beautiful. So they were brought down by heavy horse and sledge, and then there was ropes, and all the manpower in the village helped to put this stone in. and it's really deep. It's as deep as it is high, and the local stonemasons, they carved out, did the carving.
The dead cannot rise, so you better dry your eyes. You could for you knew, for you knew, for you knew, for you knew. Thank you.
Come and take a chair, your name cards upon the table. Sit here next to Jim.
100 years ago, the railways were absolutely pivotal to every movement that there was in the country, and of course in 1914, when mobilisation took place, the railways were absolutely pivotal in delivering the army to France. Not only the railways, but the ships that the railways owned.
Here we are, old fighting men, making peace with...
There were over 100 railway companies at the time, and they were all collected together so that they were under one management, and for 4 years they supplied everything that you can possibly imagine, that not only would an army need, but that the people needed here, because the Germans were attempting to starve people out, and food was coming into the country as well and being transported around in a fair way to the public. The railways, of course, without the railways there would have been none of this movement, and none of the great battles that we all know about could have possibly taken place.
Old suits and ties, a deem of disguise for heroes. Old suits and ties are silent, the sighs with ease. Here we are, old fighting men,
making peace with absent friends.
This is the Cavell van. It's the prototype van that, after the end of the First World War, was used to bring back the only 3 bodies from the killing fields of Europe. The 3 people concerned were Edith Cavell, who was quite well known as a nursing hero. She was shot for helping escaped prisoners come back through Belgium, through the hospital system. The Germans caught her and executed her. This caused an international outcry. The second person whose remains were conveyed in this van was Captain Fryatt. Captain Fryatt was accused of aiming his civilian vessel at a U-boat to try and sink it. He nearly sank the U-boat and got away free, but the Germans later trapped him and took him to Belgium and executed him. The third and most notable of all of the bodies carried in this wagon was the unknown warrior. He, of course, represents the thousands, indeed millions of dead whose graves are still abroad.
The good men gone.
Where have all
gone. Where have all the good men gone? Come and meet the guests around our table. Come and see if you can hear. Come and meet the guests around our table. The ghosts are always here.
As I was a-walking down by the Royal Hospital, grey was the morning, dark was the day. I saw a young soldier all wrapped up in linen, all wrapped up in linen.
Behind me is the old winding room, the winding building at the pithead of the Washington F pit, one of the oldest collieries in Britain. It was opened in 1777 and it was here until 1968 as a working mine when it was closed under the National Coal Board Modernisation Programme. And where I'm knelt here, there would have just been engines coming constantly to and froing, rumbling down here, taking the coal away. All the tracks have obviously been lifted now, and indeed this whole landscape has been transformed because the trees at the back of me and that landscape behind there was actually where all the spoil from the mine was.
Well, the bugles were playing and his mates were all praying. The padre was kneeling down by his bed. The last rites were given, all sins are forgiven. The sergeant was singing with his hands on his head.
There were over 11,000 men worked in this mine at the time of the First World War, and coal drove the world at that time. There would have been no war effort, no war without coal. So it was a reserved occupation. That obviously put the miners in quite a strong position during the war. There was a strike in 1915 in some of the coal pits in South Wales, and the government was forced to concede pretty much to all of their wishes because there was no way they could have any mine closures at that time.
Six of his comrades to carry his coffin. 6 of his comrades to carry him up high. Let everyone hold up a bunch of fresh roses, so no one will smell him as he passes by.
There were over 11,000 miners in this pit behind us, and in excess of 400 of them went and served overseas, and 64 of them were killed, which was about a 1 in 7 average, which is actually worse than the general average for the war. And one of the reasons for that may well have been the fact that a lot of them would have served with the specialist tunnelling companies, the Royal Engineers, whose job was to tunnel underneath the enemy lines and put explosives in there that literally could blow the enemy off their feet. But it was a hell of a job, you know, in the dark, and the German mining companies would be heading towards you. Sometimes the two sets of miners sort of cut into each other's pits and would fight in the dark in hand-to-hand combat. And you look on the roll of honour in the building in here and you just see name after name after name from the same family. And you think about the impact that must have had on these sorts of close-knit communities that were just built around one economic hub, like this pit behind us here.
By his grave vault, you have these words written. Listen, all you over his coffin, throw a bunch of fresh roses. He's a young trooper, put down in his prime.
In der Nacht vor der letzten Nacht bombardiert. Werden wir bombardiert bekommen heute Abend, wenn wir nie mehr bekommen bombardiert. In der Nacht vor der letzten Nacht bombardiert. Werden wir bombardiert bekommen heute Abend, wenn wir nie mehr bekommen
Bombed the night before. We're gonna get bombed tonight if we never get bombed anymore.
So we're on the site of the old Narborough aerodrome now, David, and you've got a picture here from 1918. What we're looking at? Whereabouts are we in relation to this now?
Right, well, we're standing round about here, Martin. The memorial is where we think the old guardroom was.
This is a big facility.
It was,
and
yes.
I mean, this is a small rural community. What sort of impact would that have on the community?
We liken it, if you, in modern day parlance, to someone dumping Cape Canaveral on your doorstep.
What interests me massively about this whole subject is how the aviation technology and flight, the First World War must have been humongous to the development of that.
It was. I mean, war drives technology. At the end of the day, it's a fact, isn't it?
Yes.
At the beginning of the war, aircraft going across to the Western Front were basically flying bathtubs. They were pushers, which means the propeller pushed rather than pulled, and they were flimsy.
Yeah.
By the end of the war, you had iconic aircraft like the Sopwith Camel. You had bombers that were capable of flying to Berlin.
So it's almost. So I suppose in 3 years, the original technology at the start of the war was almost effectively defunct by the end of the war. That's how quickly
very much so, yes.
it had moved forward.
Lost my leg in an old shell hole somewhere up the Manning Road. Will you still want me when I come home? A broken man who's less than whole.
In All Saints Churchyard in Narborough, and this corner of the churchyard is devoted to those people from the airfield who died during the war and are actually buried here. 19 of the 41 who were killed are buried in this churchyard. Almost 99% would be some sort of disaster in the air, and probably most of those would be down to some sort of engine failure. One of the big problems was, obviously, although the flying machines themselves were reasonably robust, engines were not that good. Certainly a challenge. I mean, there are quite a few instances of people who served in the trenches and then were wounded and were declared not fit for service on the front line anymore. So they opted to come into the Royal Flying Corps, presumably rather than sit vegetating, as they would have seen it, in a desk job.
door, this tiny little bent old lady came to the door saying, come in, come through, come and see my mother. I thought actually that was her, but no, we went through to see Florence. And there she was, sitting in her chair, beaming away. And I asked her a few questions about her time at the aerodrome, serving in the mess. And one of the things that she did was to allocate the daily sugar ration for the officers in little packets. And but really the impression I got was, what's all the fuss about? You know, I was there a long time ago, and I just did a job, and that was it.
4 years on with strangers, see how time has changed us.
Very different era then. What was the men's reaction?
Yes, it was. Well, we have one report that an officer from nearby RAF Marham came over a short distance to Narborough Aerodrome, and he is quoted as saying, "I never saw anything so ridiculous in all my life. There were women being drilled just like men."
Now we're coming home, we're coming